the temperature prediction of the rollout.
Do you know what? Other sports awards have come and other sports awards have gone. But the William Hill, I hate to say this because it sounds so creepy, thanks to the sponsors who really are utterly committed to it. I've done about half of them. It's been an utter pleasure because the standard of sports writing just improves and improves and improves, and there's always a good row about which is going to win. And I think it's the award which doesn't go around trying to give it the prize to the one that I think is going to sell best at Christmas. And I say that because, there are other ones around there, and you just know some weighty autobiography that's been serialised in the papers is going to win. Never with this one. So it's always a surprise, often even to us, the judges. And I genuinely think that I blame them. They have got it wrong some years. But if you actually put together the 25 winners, there are at least 20 of those books that have absolutely stood the test of time. And anyone who likes sport or good writing will be proud to have them on the shelf.
Of those 12 and a half years, do you have a favourite?
Yeah, I have several favourites, but the one if you put a gun to my head, I would say there's Duncan Hamilton's book about Brian Clough is an extraordinary thing because Brian Clough's an extraordinary story to start with. You add to that you've got a 17-year-old cub reporter from the local paper who is allowed access to one of the great characters of British sport every morning for an hour and just records his wisdom, insight, ramblings and vindictive outbursts for a long period of time. To put all that into one book was amazing. The other one I love is Don McRae's book about Jesse Owens and Joe Louis. Now, they never met, so some of the book is fantasy, but the two men and what they were going through in America, the collision course that their lives brought to us in the 20th century is another one. Again, more than once I've taken down, when I should have been reading this year's William Hill's books, to read that one, to remind myself of the standard that's actually being set.
Please tell me that a man from Carlow has a bookcase in his home with lots of books and doesn't have a Kindle and no books.
Are you kidding me? I genuinely worry, between the record collection and the books, I genuinely worry about the house coming down, and I'm not joking. Now, I have managed to palm some of these into a bloke I know who's got a lock-up, which I go and visit in a golf buggy to go and find the books and the records, but swear to God, there's no surface or wall that isn't covered in that. I got a Kindle, of course I've got a Kindle. You've got to eat your nuts off something while you're reading and watching the telly.
I mean, he's playing in another team, but when I met him, he was angry because Pep Guardiola really treated him badly, really harassed him. So when we met, he had such much anger in him who went out, and that was great for the book, for he certainly had a story to tell. And before that, he hasn't told anyone what really happened in Barcelona. And of course, it was they didn't really get along. It was a crash of the culture, actually.
Yeah, Pep signed him, didn't he? Pep signed him.
Yes,
Pep Guardiola signed him.
yes, but maybe he didn't know him really. And I think all the other stars in Barcelona, they have grown up in the club. And I mean, Zlatan described them as schoolboys, standing there. Hello there, Guardiola. But Zlatan is another guy. He's this tough guy. So they certainly didn't get along.
He's become a bit of a cult figure in England. I don't know if you're aware of that. How did that come about? How's he so loved by people on Twitter and the internet?
Well, he did that bicycle kick. It has something to do with it. But I think always when you love people, they have a story. And the book certainly gave him a story. And I used to say that it's really the American dream. This guy from ghetto, this tough guy, this criminal guy in many ways who fought his way up to the top is a great story, and he's a different kind of character. He's not that usual polite. I mean, Beckham great, of course, but he's not that, always good, polite Beckham type. He's this,
How easy was it to work with him in that case?
No, I think he was great. But we both decided, he didn't need the money or didn't need the attention. So we said, if we're going to do it, we're really going to do a good book. We're going to dig in and we're going to tell the truth. And he said, I don't want to be a role model. Because I said it myself, role model is great. Because a role model makes bad literature. I just want to tell the truth. The bad thing and the good things. And that's part of the thing that made the book successful, I think.
I think there's probably a movie in his life story. What do you think?
Oh, if you knew. We have 20 or 30 production company who wants to buy the rights, but for the moment, Zlatan says, wait a minute.
I wonder who would play him.
Yes, I thought of that many times. It would be a hard choice.
He'd have to choose. Zlatan would choose, I think.
Yes, of course.
It's clear from the book that in times past you loved the Tour de France.
Yes.
Are you still in love with it now?
I am, but what happened is it's like I was married to the Tour de France. We were divorced, and now we've got back together.
That's like a cup of tea syndrome. It doesn't taste quite as good as the first.
Well, actually, I did love this year's tour because I had that privilege of travelling inside Team Sky, and I got to know Chris Froome a lot.
Right.
And I've been hammered for this. I believe Froome is clean, especially my own country, because they don't like to think of an English team doing so well. But I believe Froome is clean, and being back on the tour was something I really enjoyed this year. First time I'd been back for 9 years, but it was great, and I did it, and I do love the race, and I want to go back next year and love it even more.
What were your early impressions of Lance Armstrong when meeting him one-on-one?
Well, when I met him first in 1993, I liked him, I have to say. I thought he was 21 years of age at the time, writing his first tour. I was writing a book. Armstrong was going to be the first chapter, and I thought, this kid has got something. But the stuff that I admired in him then were the kind of sociopathic tendencies that would manifest themselves in a much more negative way later on. When a kid says to you, I had a stepdad, and the day my mum kicked him out, happiest day of my life, I had a party. Well, you're impressed by that. I was, maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was impressed. I thought, that kid knows his own mind. But when you think about it in hindsight, in a more mature reflection, you think, is that really how you'd like your 12-year-old to be? Having a party when stepdad is kicked out? Not really. So, but I did. The answer to your question is when I interviewed Lance, I spent 3 hours with him. I wrote a piece in the book, 6,000 words. It's a glowing tribute to the guy, to a young guy writing his first tour, a guy who had no interest in the history of the tour. I'm here to win. That was his attitude. I'm here to leave a mark. When this race is over, the world are going to know that Lance Armstrong was here.
And in the book, what's striking is that you were suspicious from the first Tour de France win, immediately, 1999?
Yes, I was, and not just suspicious, convinced. And the funny thing was, people have often said, well, how could you have been so convinced when everybody else thought this was a great victory? And I thought, well, he tested positive for cortisone, that got covered up. His attitude to the clean cyclists in the race, he was a bully of the guys who were clean. And every answer he gave on doping was unconvincing. And he was so brilliant in the mountains when previously he'd ridden the Tour 4 times and he'd never been competitive in the mountains. And I thought it all added up to, this guy is as dirty as sin. And then people said, I don't know how you were so convinced. Well, when I was writing Seven Deadly Sins, I went back and I read all the stuff that was written in 99, every last line of it. And I thought, how did anybody think this guy was clean? If you were alongside of me and you were seeing all the stuff I saw, you'd be saying, of course, David, it was obvious. And it was obvious.
Must have been times when you felt like giving up the pursuit?
Honestly, no. I know it might sound, I never did. I was advised to. My great friend Paul Kimmage pulled me aside in 2005 and said, this is actually destroying your life. This is taking over your life. It's hurting your family. Now, my family never said that, to give them credit. And I remember listening to Paul saying, and I saying, yeah, you're right. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, no, you're not, and I'm not listening to you. And all I wanted to do at that time in 2005, I didn't want to cover Armstrong anymore. I'd written LA Confidential with Pierre Ballester in French. I wanted that book out in English, and I dedicated myself to getting it out in English, and I got it published in America in 2007 as From Lance to Landis, the inside story of American doping at the Tour de France, and getting that out was a big deal for me. That was like John Kerry, the Democrat, who's now doing all that great work with the Iranians. He was going to work with Armstrong on different cancer projects. He read From Lance to Landis, and he kind of distanced himself from him. And now that to me was a little victory,
I live in Spain, and the public there, the offences of Armstrong, Contador and such like, they don't seem to treat it anything like as seriously as we have here, or those sort of. And Contador is still a hero with most of the public.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And the Spaniards, when I was at the press conference in 2001, and we were asking Armstrong about Ferrari. Right, and there was something like 18 questions of rubbish, because everybody wanted to ask about this doping doctor that Lance is working with. And eventually we get around to the doping, and there's some good debate. And the Spanish journalists were there, you could see they were agitating, they were agitated. And one of the Spanish journalists said, when there was a pause in the doping thing, he said, Lance, have you any plans of riding the Vuelta in September? And I just thought, guys, hold on. Can we not find out if this guy's a cheat first, But the Spanish had a different attitude. And to me, it's diminished Spanish sport.
And those blood samples that lie somewhere in Spain, or did, will we ever see them? Will we ever know?
I don't think so. And it was a difficult. I think at that time Spain was ready to be a bit more honest about doping. But Spanish law meant that doping was not a crime. So therefore, the rights of people's privacy when they go to their doctor transcended the need for the public to see who owned those blood samples. So that lady judge who made the decision, in law she made the correct decision.
I've spent the last 2 weeks talking to fellow journos who all say to me, just say one thing to David Walsh, bloody well done and good on you and such like, which is tremendous. But during it all, during that pursuit, were many of our fellow professions on your side?
I think a lot of them were, but a lot of the cycling journalists had bought into Lance early on, and they didn't want to change. But forget the journalists. Our great spin doctor par excellence, Alistair Campbell, Mr. Blair's man. The man who was influential in Britain's presence in Iraq, we could say. When Tony Blair lost power, Alistair decided to become a sports writer, and he wrote for the Times. And the guy he most wanted to interview was Lance Armstrong, at a time when the evidence that Armstrong was a doper was overwhelming. Even the dumbest of dumbasses could have seen Lance was a doper. Alistair went out and interviewed him, and they loved each other. Alistair never asked him a tough question. Lance gave the usual BS, and Alistair soaked it up. One of the most eminent political minds of our time bought that nonsense. And I thought to myself, Alistair, the country was sort of in your hands, man.
He says, most recently, Lance Armstrong said that, okay, punish me and everything, but don't forget the others. Now, Tyler Hamilton has won this award, the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year award, in recent years. Does Armstrong have a case on that? Should others be charged?
He's a particular case, Lance. He says, I got the death penalty, they got off. The reason he got the death penalty was they asked him to come in with his hands up and tell the truth. He indicated he might. They were prepared to just take away 2 of his 7 tours. They were prepared to give him something like a 2-year ban. He then changed his mind, and he went to law to try and stop USADA having jurisdiction in his case. Now, once you do that, you put yourself beyond the realm of mercy. So he wasn't going to get a merciful treatment, and he didn't. But he got what he deserved, in my view. The thing that Lance did was, as soon as he got caught, and the Sunday Times went looking for their money, he paid the money back, and he paid it back generously. And he has since talked about that and said, I've sorted things out with David Walsh in the Sunday Times. They deserve to get their money back, and they were the first people to get it back. And I think that's his way of saying is our relationship was business, it was professional. We were never friends, so there is no need for apologies or anything like that. I was a journo trying to prove he was a crook. He was a crook trying to conceal the truth from everybody, and I was a problem. So it was just business.
Well done to you, and well done to your good lady wife, who, from reading the book, clearly went through it herself and put up with a lot.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she did. I mean, she has a belief that basically Lance was member of our family for a certain amount of time. Not the most loved member of the family, mind you, but we had grown used to his presence.
The big difference between what was going on at Godolphin and what was involved in the Bill Roper gang in the late 50s and early 60s was that Roper and his confederates were doping horses to lose. They were stopping favourites from winning, safe in the knowledge as bookmakers that they could lay bets on them and that there was no way they could possibly not come out ahead on the race. But doping to win used to go on in the old days as well. You know, trainers right back to the early 20th century used to try and pep them up with what they called a speedball. It's as old as racing, I think.
And you mentioned one name, Bill Roper, but who were the central characters at the heart of the scandal you talk about in the book?
Okay, right. Well, Bill was really the main man. His offices were not far away from here in Covent Garden, in Monmouth Street. He was a South Londoner, bookmaker and gambler. His nickname was Mr. Racing. He was very pleased about the fact that he laid bets to the quality, as he saw it. He boasted in court in the end that he laid bets to everybody from Lord and Lady Rosebery to the Newmarket postman. But Bill was in his early 50s. He was quite as people laughingly said about him, he may be no oil painting, but he was a cheeky chappie. And he fell madly in love with this very attractive young woman who sounds fascinating, called Micheline Lujan, who was Swiss. She'd come to England initially to work as an au pair in his family home because Bill had a wife and children in North London. He fell head over heels. She wanted to be a beautician. He bought her a shop in Knightsbridge initially. He had a penthouse apartment in Kensington High Street, and he was taking her to all the best restaurants and nightclubs of the time. And of course he got into a situation where he was trying to think, how the hell is he going to pay for all this? And being a well-informed bookie and wheeler-dealer on the racecourses, he knew that doping went on. So he decided he was going to be the man who would organise it and turn it into a proper conspiracy. And there were all kinds of characters involved, including a very dodgy individual called Edward Teddy Smith, who was nicknamed the Witch Doctor, who supplied them with the drugs. And there were some serious gangsters in the background. I mean, it wasn't all, fun and larks. It got very dangerous.
And I obviously, growing up in the 60s, recall famous court cases and crimes.
Yep.
Obviously, the Great Train Robbery.
Yes, absolutely.
And the Profumo affair and everything.
Yep.
I didn't realise at the same time that some of those were happening and court cases were going on. This one was.
Absolutely. That's one of the fascinating things about it. What intrigued me about it, the Great Train Robbery, as you say, happened in August 63. These guys eventually came to trial in October 63. But some of them who were in the gang were allegedly involved in laundering money from the Great Train Robbery on racecourses. And also you had the Profumo affair going on in the background. And Bill and his mistress, that was front and back page news in the newspapers at the time. Papers like the Sketch, the Herald, they absolutely, they loved it. It sold papers. It was a big sensational case, and it was fascinating to go back and look at it.
Not just because of the drugs in the racing, but because of the murder and the mistresses.
I think that's right. The glamorous femme fatale, obviously, then as now, that intrigued people.
What became of those characters?
Well, this is a very good question. We know that after he was released from jail, Bill Roper went to South Africa with Micheline. And although his story can be followed and some of the others, and one of his gang ended up in the Brinks Mat robbery as well. So, they weren't just carry-on type villains. There were some serious villains. But Micheline, she absolutely vanishes into the mist. Whether she changed her name, whether she went back to Switzerland. There's another story, maybe a sequel to tell there one day about her. It's a great story.
We have no idea if she's dead or alive?
No idea. Absolutely none. It's an intriguing story.
I spoke to a bookie today, only today, who expressed his concerns that events like the Godolphin scandal will drive punters, fellow punters like you and I, away from the sport. What do you think?
Well, I think there are several things to say about that. Firstly, I think that it's beholden on the racing authorities to investigate cases like that thoroughly and convincingly. And I know this is not necessarily pertinent to what we're talking about this evening, but I think there were a lot of people, including serious journalists, were worried that the British Horse Racing Authority handled it all too quickly. You know, the gentleman was unveiled on Monday practically. He was in up before the beak on Tuesday, and he was gone by Wednesday. And we said, oh, there we are. We found the rotten apple. It's all done. Don't worry. And I think they must be more convincing and thorough than that if they want to hold people's confidence. Obviously, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that going around doping racehorses to win or lose is some kind of entertaining thing that should be encouraged. But on a milder level, I don't think racing should shy away from having a slightly raffish image around the edges. That's what partly drew me into it when I was a child, and I know that Britain has changed since then. I understand that, but the idea that it's the Salvation Army is ludicrous. If you go to the races and you have a bet, you've got to be in charge of your own judgment, and you've got to take the consequences. And frankly, not all horses are trying to win every time, because they may be trying to win on a particular day, and it's not the crime of the century, and we ought to embrace it a little bit more and have fun with it. And I would be very sorry to see every last shred of, if you like, skullduggery driven out of the sport. I think that would be a sad day.
Finally, you still love the sport, though?
Oh, passionately, absolutely adore it. What is sad? Again, although obviously the bookmakers of Bill Roper's era, they were a bunch of rogues, a lot of them, but they were very interesting characters. I've met some of these old gentlemen now who are still alive in their late 80s. They're fascinating people. That kind of bookmaking and betting, you only really see it nowadays at places like Cheltenham in March, maybe at Royal Ascot, maybe at York in August. And it does sadden me that you go racing and few people bet with the bookies. Everybody wants to bet either with the tote or they're betting online, and of course that's very convenient and that's great. But the bookies have added so much colour and panache to racing. You know, they've been villains sometimes as well, but they've added so much to racing in Britain. And I'd be very sorry if these are the last generation that we're going to see doing all that calling the odds.
Actually the six as something for everybody, because the more scientific will doubtless absorb every word of David Epstein's book with relish. Is there really a sports gene? And if there is, what's the point of those of us who don't have it ever putting on a pair of trainers? If you like skullduggery, past and present, then Jenny Reid's Doped takes you back to the 1960s and a horse racing gang who nobbled the Derby favourite. Ed Hawking's book, as you just said, Bookie, Gambler, Fixer, Spy, will intrigue, fascinate and annoy in equal measure, and the first chapter of that book will leave you aghast and agape. Reactions you will doubtless feel from start to finish in Zlatan Ibrahimovic's riveting book, I Am Zlatan Ibrahimovic. A more traditional book, The Boys in the Boat, tells the extraordinary and moving tale of the Americans who won the rowing 8 at the Hitler Olympics in 1936. And finally, David Walsh's book on Lance Armstrong is the full stop, for the moment at least, on a tale that diminishes all of sport but salutes genuine journalistic integrity. His pursuit of the Tour de France, in his own words, has you cheering in the stands at the end at his perseverance and courage. And the winner, well, sometimes it takes the panel 5 minutes and sometimes 5 hours, and this year we were heading towards the upper end of that scale. But for a book that engages, amazes, fascinates and grips through to its climax, and is surely destined for either the big or the small screen, the William Hill Sports Book of the Year for 2013 is Doped by Jamie Miller.
I've been a lifelong, passionate racing enthusiast, and I've always loved the gambling side of horse racing, and I've always been attracted, I have to say, to this sort of aura of skullduggery and chicanery that sort of is part of that. I started to know about this story at my grandmother's knee when I was about 7 or 8 years old. She used to share the sporting life with me. She introduced me to the magnificent, incomparable Peter O'Sullivan and his commentaries on television on racing. And she left me aware that there was a big story there that had never been fully told. Working as a journalist, writing other racing books, getting to know people in the bookmaking fraternity, I gradually became aware that the story was more incredible than I could have imagined with this relationship between Bill and his lover Micheline, and all the incredible cast of toffs and spivs and all of them that floated around them. And it was an absolute pleasure and joy to write.